Glyph, welcome back to Talk Python to me. Great to have you here.
It's great to be back.
Yes, indeed. We are going to bring it home for everyone. Personal computing right on their computer. Like, we're going to program like it's 1997. But better.
Yeah, it's weird how you say that, and I totally know what you mean. But also, believe it or not, computers are way better than they were in 1997.
Better than my Pentium? Are you serious?
There's not only are they better, there's just a lot more of them in front of you in a much smaller space.
Yeah, I have a ridiculous number of computers in my office. It's almost out of control. But what do you do with the old ones? You turn them into servers. Come on. Home servers.
Well, that's a topic for a different day.
Yeah, it sure is. All right. Well, I'm super excited to talk about programming a computer. We're going to talk a little bit of Mac, a little bit of Linux, a little bit of Windows, and more broadly, other things. Most of it with Python, not 100% necessarily, but almost all of it. And it's going to be a great time. Now, before we dive into it, though, I'm sure there's some folks out there who are like, Glyph, that's the guy that just, he's so unique, he gets to go by like a single name. How awesome is that? But who is he anyway? Who are you?
Who am I? That's a good question. I've had a varied and eclectic career, I guess. Right now, I am an independent software developer. I do some consulting here and there. I do a bunch of open source development. I've got a Patreon for my own independent stuff. I'm sure we'll get into some of it because some of it is directly relevant to today's topic. Mm-hmm. I'm doing some Mac desktop app development. I've got some secret projects, which I hope that I will eventually actually finish and release.
It's awesome you're here to announce those today.
Unfortunately, I don't think we're going to be making any news just now. Yeah, so I do a bunch of open source project development. So my own like Patreon and my own GitHub sponsors is mostly about kind of different stuff that I'm doing. And this talk that we're going to be discussing today that I did give a couple years back and I'm giving a refreshed version of at the upcoming PyCon. I did release a couple of packages when I first gave it. And that's the kind of stuff that I do with my personal backing that folks sign up for. But I'm also doing, I suppose I should say for any new listeners, I am the founder of the Twisted project, kind of precursor to Async.io in the standard library. And nowadays, now that Async.io is kind of standard in the standard library, it's a collection of protocol implementations and testing tools and whatnot for event-driven programming. And that is a member project of the PSF, which has its own GitHub sponsors. And I also am going to be doing some contract development to do maintenance on that. So we can actually make use of some of the funding that we've collected over the years, do some more fundraising. Just a couple hours ago, I was doing our first party WebSockets integration. So I do a lot of different things, is what I'm saying. It's just got a lot going on.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. I love it. How does one get their project to become a member project of the PSF?
Well, so technically speaking, Twisted is the PSF is the Twisted project's fiscal sponsor. We got there via the circuitous route of really not wanting to make a nonprofit 501c3 25 years ago. And in the course of trying to avoid that, we signed up with the Software Freedom Conservancy. The SFC and Twisted weren't quite aligned because Twisted was like a really liberally licensed project that was mostly focused on infrastructure, and we were not particularly interested in like the free software movement-y aspects of things. And the SFC was largely about like GPL license enforcement, creating like a consistent legal environment under which the free software movement can operate. And so
make sure people copyleft everything. That sort of thing.
Less trying to get everybody to copyleft everything, although they do a little bit of that. And I'm sure they would certainly prefer it, but more about like enforcing it once you have, right?
Yeah, that's what I mean.
They have member projects like Inkscape, and I believe they do work with a bunch of different projects to kind of litigate and try to, get people to obey the GPL. And so since we had a little bit of a, differing goals, and the PSF is more interested in like promoting Python as infrastructure. We moved over our fiscal sponsorship to the PSF. So mostly, I think the way that you do it is you just ask, but the PSF is taking on a lot right now. So you may be in a long queue if you were to try to sign up now.
Yeah, I'm sure it's a hard process, and they filter a lot of stuff out that doesn't really fit. Obey the GPL. I feel like that's a good conference shirt or maybe a hat. Just, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, once again, a topic for a different day. I have enough feelings on that to fill a couple hours.
Well, moving right along then. I first became aware of your talk sitting in the sunshine in San Francisco at PyBay 2 years ago, I suppose, coming up year and a half, something like that, when you gave a variation of this talk, programming your computer with Python. That was a great talk. That's one of my favorite from the conference. So
thank you very much.
Then I saw you giving it again at PyCon, and so I thought, you're still into this stuff. Let's talk about some more about it.
Yeah. So, what really inspired this talk in the first place, and it's pretty much, it's like as relevant now, I think, as it was back when I first thought to give it, was just like Python is really popular in a bunch of different contexts, but particularly at PyBay, right? Like there's different audiences, and PyBay and PyCon, I think, have a kind of similar audience in that you get a lot of people doing the typical stuff with Python, which is to say back-end development and web development and data.
A lot of APIs, a lot of AIs, a lot of Jupyter.
Right.
Yeah.
And Jupyter is like starting to edge a little bit closer to what I'm talking about here, but it is still fundamentally kind of back-endy, like, you kind of expect the code to run on like a big cluster or something. And there's just not a ton of local compute, right? Like your typical data scientist is doing kind of batch stuff. It's not, Jupyter has little, and Jupyter is in a way like a microcosm of Python itself, in that there are interactive widgets in Jupyter. You could be programming stuff kind of quasi-locally, right? Like you could be interacting with your own file system. You could be building stuff that you can directly manipulate the data, but like you probably aren't. You probably just, loading up some data frames and, some NumPy arrays or whatever, and then doing a bunch of batch computations on them. And so we build all these skills that about just generalized software development. Like most of the skills that you build while working on Python do generalize. And then we kind of staple those general skills to this very specific, like a couple of very specific use cases, when Python's like a super general tool. And there exist all these libraries and all these tools to help you put Python in all kinds of places to solve all kinds of problems. And then when we need to do like, we solve some other problem, we end up just picking some other tool. And this is in a way, right? We're talking about this one talk that I've put together, and then I've delivered a few times and will be delivering again. But there's kind of a through line through a lot of my public speaking and a lot of the topics that I've covered that are different aspects of this, right? There's this one, which is like programming your own local computer, but there's also desktop development, and there's also mobile development. And I've talked about front end. I gave a presentation, I don't even know when, maybe PyCon 2009 or something, about like using, but before there was PyScript, there was PyJamas, right? PyJS, these like front end frameworks where you could build whole front ends with Python in the browser. And like, because Python's the second best language for everything, right? And that's really, really powerful. It's kind of better than being the best language for something, because the best language for making a Mac app is Swift, right? Like you just get the first party thing from Apple, and it's really easy onboarding experience. But the problem with that is that it's the best language for Mac app development. So everything else is like a second-class citizen in the Swift world.
Or a complete foreigner where it doesn't work at all.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And I do say second-class citizen because there is a Swift backend ecosystem, and you can kind of use it for that stuff. And there is a bunch of open source work, but like it's very clearly deprioritized. Even as Apple itself invests resources into it, it's just clearly never going to be the thing, because they have a strategic vision. They're all about moving miles and miles of capacitive touchscreen glass, and if you're not in the critical path of doing that, then fundamentally, like the market is just not going to prioritize that. And so that
Even within the Apple ecosystem, the Mac desktop is deprioritized compared to iOS.
right. And like the Mac is doing very, very well right now, right? Like it's not a dire situation, but you can still tell. Like there's still hints there about how that kind of financial destiny shapes things. And in the Python world, people just kind of do stuff, and we don't have like a roadmap or a set of priorities, right? There are certainly economic pressures, right? Like AI is certainly distorting the landscape a little bit right now in terms of what gets, interest and hype. But like if you're doing something cool with Python, right? Like Blender has Python in it, and you can just use that. And it's been there for years and years. It's not going anywhere, right? Like it's not getting deprioritized. The people who put Python into Blender and do stuff with that have their reasons for doing it, and they're going to keep doing it. They're not, there's no email they're going to get from an executive that says, never mind, but Python really needs to focus on AI now. So Blender's an LLM today, right? Like, no, they have their own stuff that they're working on.
You probably get it to render the words LLM, but that's not what they mean.
Sure. So anyway, so all that said, what that means, Python being the second best language for everything means that if you're going to do a desktop thing with Python, you still have access to all of those libraries and all those tools that you could bring with you. If you're going to do desktop automations in Python instead of like AppleScript, you've got all the libraries that come from the world of Python that allow you to have access to all of this power and all that expertise that you've built up over the course of your career doing back-end stuff or data analysis that you can then just do on your own computer. And so there's a few aspects to this, which are, there's like the kind of personal automation stuff, there's the user interface stuff. How would you like to approach this? What would you like to talk about first?
Let's start with riffing a bit on why local computing matters, or maybe why it shouldn't be as overlooked as it is.
I think that there's, I talked a lot about like the library ecosystem and all these different tools and functionality, whatever, but like bringing it back down to fundamentals, your computer is probably really, really fast. Like even if you don't have the best top of the line machine, and a lot of us as developers do, have a lot of privilege to have access to extremely powerful hardware, right? Like a laptop that you can get right now, for kind of a middle of the road, affordable laptop price is like hundreds of times more powerful than the most powerful server from a couple of decades ago, right? Like you have so much power at your fingertips. And not only that, but there's a latency issue too, right? Like even if your computer weren't that powerful, even a few years ago when computers didn't have as much CPU and as much RAM, and there's kind of a slope that goes upwards over time where there's always more of those things. So like anytime you go backwards a few years, you'll have less of it. But there's persistently throughout the history of computing, you pretty much always get better latency if you're doing something locally. And so if you are trying to get something done, and if you have a workflow that you're executing many, many times a day, and you want to get it done quickly, your local computer is probably faster than any remote server you have access to, just to get the task kicked off, get all the data resident, right? Like
I have an 8-core server for all the infrastructure at TalkPython with I think 8 cores, 16 gigs RAM, something like that. It's plenty. I'm pretty sure my M4 Mac Mini on a single core operation is faster than it.
Yeah. And not only that, but like, and it's interesting how you phrase that, right? Like you don't even know, right? You're not even sure how much compute you have locally because you're not stressing it, right? Like you're not using it up. Not to mention the fact that those Talk Python infrastructure, running the most popular podcast in the Python space, I'm sure that it's all very heavily loaded, right? There's stuff happening to it all the time. Every time you post anything on the Fediverse, it's got to be fetched 100 million times or whatever the hug of death is these days.
It's like a DDoS that you do to yourself every time you post something.
Right. And so like you have all of your local compute is also, in addition to being probably way more powerful than you are initially would give it credit for, because you think of it as like a desktop or a mobile device as opposed to like a really powerful computer. In addition to being super low latency, it's also probably just idle all the time, right? Like it's not doing anything. And if you're plugged in and you're at a desk, right? Like if you're not literally mobile on battery all the time, that's free real estate, right? Like you can just use it for whatever you need. You got lots of RAM, you got lots of disk, you got lots of CPU overhead. To some extent, this is also kind of my secret motivation for doing this. Over the years in the industry, and you can kind of see this with that push towards like iOS and iPads and mobile devices and web front ends, right? There's always this push for the industry as overall to say, maybe you don't need so much power locally. Maybe we should take that away and put it in the cloud. Wouldn't it be more convenient if it was all in the cloud, right? And there's no nefarious individual or group that's doing this, but it's just a constant economic pressure. And my personal feeling is like, no, give it to me. Put all the compute locally. I want to have it. I don't know what you're doing with it. I don't want it multi-tenanted in the cloud where I have like fewer security guarantees and fewer privacy guarantees. And if I want things to be fast, I have to like move them away to be like less secure. I want it to be local, so I want people to do things that require it to be local. And so
I'm with you. Yeah, and I'm with you. And there's a lot of interesting technologies these days that make that possible, from local LLMs to Docker to a bunch of things. I don't know how you feel about it. It sounds like we might be on the same page. Like, to me, it's also a bit of agency. It's just, I don't want the only place that my code can run is on a bespoke cloud from one of the hyperscalers. I want to be able to, at maximum complexity, say Docker compose up and then run my code. At more likely, just run my code. You know what I mean?
Well, and there's a scaling issue there too. If you try to make sure that you can run, and we'll get to like UIs and interactivity in a bit, but like even if you're just running your backend batch code, if you can run your full deployed cloud-based web application on your local computer, then, and you can have an equivalent environment that you can bring up with Docker Compose or whatever, I forget what the tiny Kubernetes is, the K some
kube control.
Kube control. Like there's also like there's K7S, I think. There's some tool that scales everything down for you. If you can run it on your laptop, then you can run it on an alternate host, right? Like speaking now kind of stepping out of my, weird hippie activist individual activism frame of reference and into I'm actually a consultant that does business for corporations kind of role. They're actually pretty aligned value-wise, because if the only place that you can run your cloud application is in a hyperscaler's cloud, then you have no price pressure driving the competitive landscape in a way that benefits you as the application developer. You're just that I won't say a brand name, but your cloud provider will ratchet up your costs, and then you'll just have to pay more costs, right? Like there's no way that you have any leverage against them to say, well, because you can't credibly say, I'll move somewhere else, because moving somewhere else becomes this huge migration cost. Now, there's limits to that, right? Like there are applications that you really can't run just fully on a laptop, but like there's a way larger proportion of our listeners today who can totally just do that than think they can. Right? Like most applications can actually just run on a laptop.
I don't know what number you would put on it. I would say it's got to at least be 95%.
It's tough to put like a number on it like that, but it is also the kind of thing where if it's not 95%, there's also like a lot of the ones that really can't, because they're architected around like cloud native or branded technologies that have like these very specific APIs. It's not clear to me that that's bringing a lot of benefits in a lot of cases, right? Yeah. Like, having it, especially because like whenever you're running something locally, you also have, especially if you can like make sure that it's easy to be portable, right? Like, and you can run it locally on your Mac, locally on your, like in WSL, right? Not just in Docker, but like kind of in the same environment that your dev tools live. If you can maintain that level of portability, the decrease, like the increase in operational costs that you have when you have to go and like do complicated stuff to get the reliability and the elasticity that your cloud provider might give you. You actually get a huge amount in just like, you can run a debugger on it. You can single step through the code,
Yes.
right? Like the ability to do that is really overlooked. And that's not to denigrate, debugging in production, right? Like using tools like Honeycomb that can like give you traces and help you like really understand what's happening at scale. There's a lot of logical abstractions, which you don't need to scale up to understand what's going on with them. And single stepping and, debugging and being able to run in a kind of in vitro environment is really, really a useful feature that it doesn't seem like you're giving up anything, but you are when you don't have that ability to run it locally.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you can run it locally or in Docker, the chances that you can just say, you know what, I don't want to be in this cloud anymore. Some new opportunities opened up. Hetzner has a new local data center. DigitalOcean has something amazing, and it's a fifth the price and it's just as fast or faster. Let's just move. You know what I mean? And if it's, well, we move our Docker containers and our little system just goes over, that's one thing. If you got to rework serverless and queuing and all of a sudden it's like, yeah, but no.
Right. And like you can still make use of technologies like serverless, right? Like if you develop all your code as if it's a library that you're just like, and most of your logic is in kind of a neutral form factor where you can use it from a desktop app or a Docker container or a serverless container. That's it may not be worth investing that much in making that possible if that's not really your core competency and you don't need it, but it's not worth nothing, and it's worth investing a little bit. And often one of the points that I try to make in this in the talk is like, it's not actually that hard, right? Like it seems really, really challenging, but a lot of the times it's just because the desktop tools and the local development tools are not quite as well documented. It's not as easy to Google for something and get an immediate result for an error message, just because not as many people are using them. And so there's a collective action thing here where it's a call to action to get more folks involved in doing things locally, because it makes the whole process easier for everybody else.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Before we jump too far from this whole server aspect you were talking about, are you familiar with Coolify?
I'm not. This is the first I'm hearing of it.
This is a pretty interesting open source project that is basically, I'll use their H2, an open source and self-hostable Heroku Netlify Vercel alternative. So basically it's like some kind of Docker compose up sort of thing, but then it gives you the platform to Git push into and host all your things, kind of like those places I named.
Oh, I might have to check that out.
Yeah, it looks pretty interesting. And if you're thinking, well, we have more requirements, we need continuous deployment, we know these things, like look around. I think there's a lot of interesting options. And then this could go on EC2, or it could go on Hetzner, or it could go on DigitalOcean or Linode or whatever, right? There's a lot of interesting options here.
And just one more thing on the whole, local compute power part of this, which is that because all of these alternatives that they're talking about have famously had drama with their free tiers and with the amount of kind of compute that you get. One of the other things, one of the examples I bring up at the talk is Twisted's test suite, and just like how much faster it can be if you run it locally. And this is particularly of interest to the open source part of the Python community. And the reason I'm raising it here is because free tiers are one of the places that you see this, right? Like if you actually go all in a kind of server first workflow, and you have a for-profit company and you're developing software that you have customers for, the local compute power argument does start to fall apart a little bit, because it's like, well, you really can get like very, very powerful servers that can run your CI really, really fast. But also, you're not getting those for free in the GitHub Actions tier that open source projects have access to. And particularly if you need to test on like macOS and Windows, like that, you're going to be paying for that. Like it is, if you are trying to subsist on free resources, you will often find they're like very slow and heavily contended with a lot of other projects. And so having the ability to run your tests locally to decrease the pressure on like your free tier trial test host, or your free tier GitHub Actions or Circle CI or whatever, you will the difference in speed there is huge because you're like way over provisioned in your local compute, and these providers who would really like you to pay a pretty penny for like the really fast stuff, a lot of us, just like open source projects for logistical reasons, often have to, even if the project does have some resources, we still need to stay in the like free tier of these things, because like if your library has a big budget for CI, but all of your downstreams that are actually using it have to use the GitHub Actions free tier, you really want to be living there anyway, even if you could afford to live elsewhere.
Right. Otherwise it gets out of sync and things don't work so well. Yeah, cool. All right, well, let's talk desktop apps a bit. So give us some of the benefits of desktop first development. I mean, hotkeys, notifications, what else?
Well, so those are the big ones, and there are and there are other things: hotkeys, notifications, sounds,
Geolocation,
HUD overlays, right? The ability to like put a window onto the screen. The fact that you can do all of those things, right? Like the presence of any one of those features, the ability to like pop up a window or whatever, like many of these things can kind of be emulated in web apps, right? The browser is a really powerful deployment platform these days, but the way that you develop something, if it is running locally, like case in point. So there's this app, there's this app that I'm developing called Pomodoro Boros, which is which I'm running right now. It is a Pomodoro timer, and it puts a big old HUD overlay over your whole screen so that you do not get distracted. Because I have ADHD, and I need, if it's not in my visual field, it might as well not exist. And so an app like that, not only can it remain running in the background, which like if you quit your browser, you close a browser tab, it can go away, and there's like you can summon it back if you intentionally want to, if you as the user remember to relaunch that tab and repin it and put it in the right place and everything. Like you can do it, but first of all, speaking as a person of ADHD, I don't want to be doing that all the time, and I physically can't sometimes. But also, just like even for neurotypical people with plenty of executive function, that's the computer's job. Like the computer's job is to remember to run stuff, right? Like, and you can have the app relaunch itself. It can launch at login, right? Like having a browser launch at login is a whole rigmarole. It's like not impossible, but it requires lots of weird little hacks, and it tends to be kind of fragile. Whereas, you can make an app that doesn't have a command Q or like Alt F4 quit, right? Like you can have it go into the background and run by itself. It can schedule cron jobs. It can just generally keep itself running and automating away in such a way that if it needs to grab your attention again via a notification, via a geolocation hook, right? Like you can not just do geolocation to geofence yourself, but also to like schedule your app to launch when crossing a geolocation fence. That's a little trickier, but like it is definitely a thing you can do. All of those things make it so that you can have code that runs when it needs to run and that you can interact with immediately, right? Like you can have a cloud service like send you a push notification and like, or a text message or whatever, and try to remind you that you should do something. But with a desktop app, with something that's running locally, even if it's running locally in your terminal, right? Like one of the other things that I have a different app called PinPal, which is all about helping you memorize new passwords. PinPal can actually run, I'm working on the desktop app version, but the other thing it can do is you just set it up in your PS1 so that like, if it's time to rehearse your passwords, it like puts a little badge in your command prompt. And so even if you're not going for the full, like high touch desktop API integration, just the fact that it's running in my local shell on every time it displays the prompt, that allows it to be like much more present and something that I'm not going to forget. And certainly is for things that involve my development workflow, I'm not going to forget something that can be sensitive to what my working directory is, right? Like it can activate things and deactivate things and make it so that like anything that I need to do, the local computation has already happened, right? Like it's already done by the time I, as the user, am thinking that I need it.
Yeah, that's awesome. It could probably do like automation, accessibility things. Like you could have it run on a schedule or something when you're in your email or something like that. Like, hey, you're in your email. Remember that these two things need to be done now, but not, not hassle you at 7 or 8 a.m. or whenever you said to hassle you, but like when you're already doing the thing, right?
Yeah, and there are that's another thing that you can do. I'm not even sure if I mentioned this one in the talk, but there are two things that the word notifications means in the macOS world, at least. There's a UN user notification center, which is where you send notifications to the user, but there's also notifications, or NS notification center, which is like just stuff is happening on the computer. Is your battery empty, like past a certain threshold? Like you said, you're in your email, right? You can ask the operating system not just what's the frontmost window, but tell me when the frontmost window changes, right? Like send me an event. And they're different on different operating systems. Unfortunately, a lot of this kind of breaks down on Windows because Windows is, and I say this as unbiasedly as I can, kind of a misery. Like there's so many just terrible APIs on Windows. Everything's possible, but nothing is easy. And so unfortunately, some of the talk that can very quickly show these like rapid examples on Mac and Linux is like, and then on Windows, here's this like 900-page book that was published 20 years ago. It's probably the way you have to go learn how to do this. COM in particular.
Yeah, really let me introduce you to the Win32 API and DCOM, and you're going to have a good time.
Right. And yeah, you keep thinking like, oh, there's going to, well, they didn't they get rid of all that when they upgraded to the WinRT API? And it's like, nope, Windows is a sedimentary operating system. There's just layers one on top of another.
Layers are formed; they are not removed.
Exactly. So anyway, but I don't want this to be like a trash talking Windows thing because there's definitely ways to do a lot of this on Windows too. There's message pumps that you can get from like you open an hwind in a foreign executable and you can kind of tell what it's doing. And
you can hook into some interesting things there to like track other applications and so on. Just to, I'm not sure if this will appease folks or not, to put a good word out there for Windows. You won't program your own stuff. Like VB6 and some of these rapid GUI tools were ridiculous back in the day, even though they're not. I'm sure you could still build with them. They're just like, I need a button here, a text box there, and when I click this, I need that to become a web browser. Click, and that's like 3 minutes, and you're good to go.
Honestly, a lot of the stuff that is good about the Windows API, you end up kind of going through that portal back in time where you're like, how would I have done this in VB6? And then you like, and unfortunately, as I'm not a heavy Windows user, one of the problems is that like the really good automation targets for Windows are frequently the things like Excel and Word, and I don't have Excel or Word. I got Steam and Windows Mail and a couple of open source applications on my Windows install. But if you have there's also things like Excel wings and like people who are like heavy Windows users who have more concrete automation use cases for doing things locally. There are a ton of ways that you can get really deep into a really rich API in a lot of the Microsoft first-party applications. Which again, this is one of those places where they're kind of like they're pushing people to kind of the web-based Office 365 stuff, and like they still have a big investment in local desktop platform, but a lot of people are kind of not using it as much. And if you get in there and you build a lot of workflows around that desktop stuff, like Microsoft will notice. They will want to support you in doing that. And so, like there are lots of tools there for getting what you need to do done. The problem with Windows is really it's not as generalized. Like everything has its own API on Windows. And so you have to, on the Mac, I can tell you like, oh, well, there's just a general way that you can learn about an application. and many applications have kind of a half-hearted implementation of it. On Windows, if you like, it's much harder for a talk like mine to go give a cursory level of like, hey, look at this Wonderland. You can kind of get into lots of different things, and here's some brief examples. It's more like, no, on Windows, you have to kind of know what you want to do. Like, once you know and you're willing to dig in really hard on a specific automation target, there's lots there, but it may be somewhat different from system to system.
Yeah, I haven't tried it, but a lot of the stuff that you would like reach out and interact with for that stuff is in the bunch of COM objects, component object model, which are tremendously hard to build and get right. But once they're there, I think you can use them pretty easily. You can probably use that from Python pretty easily, and then just look at the documentation.
Yeah,
that thing.
This is the tricky thing. So this is one of the things I'm enhancing for the next iteration of the talk is that I dug in a little deeper on those tools. There's a tool called OLayView, which is an ancient tool. If you bring that up and you start digging around in your local system, you can find a lot of these APIs. Win32com is from PyWin32. Gives you direct access to all that legacy stuff. And this is actually a kind of a great way of illustrating the Python's the second best language for everything. Like if you're doing stuff with C# these days, like the modern Microsoft toolchain, they push you really hard towards WinRT and like the new way of doing things. And it's really difficult to get into the older, COM stuff because they're like, that's deprecated. It's not really... it's not something you're using with .NET. Like, forget about that. Whereas in Python, you can pip install WinRT, pip install PyWin32 right next to each other and be calling both different kinds of APIs, and it's perfectly easy. Again, because nobody's setting out a roadmap for the Python community. And this is kind of why I like giving talks about stuff like this. If you're going to a conference and taking a tutorial, you could learn a whole new thing, right? Like you can do a ton of learning in a 3-hour tutorial. If you're going to a conference talk, you're getting can folks see this screen on the live stream, by the way?
On the live stream they can, but not on the recording.
Okay, so I do have to mention that Michael just brought up the PyWin32 page, and there are 3 maintainers. And the top one is me, because as much as I'm not a Windows guy, I'm on that list actually because when at the advent of binary wheels, I was the one who kind of went in and said like PyWin32 has got to have like downloadable wheels for every version of Python. I built my own like fork of it because I couldn't get access for a while called PyPI-Win32. It was just like no code changes, just it's built and it has a bunch of hacks to get the paths right so that you could just import it without like changing your Windows path or manually loading DLLs. So so I've been doing this for a long time.
So that definitely does this COM stuff as well. So that's super cool.
But the reason that I like giving talks about stuff like this is that you can give these pointers out to things where people have been toiling away, building all of this stuff for you in Python for years and years. There's PyWin32. There's I think it's called, now I'm forgetting which one's the current one, but there's WinRT, the WinRT module on PyPI. There's the Python dbus. There's like all of these different tools that people have built integrations for your desktop and your operating system, and they're almost all like pretty recently maintained. PyGObject, right? Like if you want to build GUI applications with the native toolkit for GNOME,
PyObjC maybe.
Yep, PyObjective-C. So if you and the PyObjective-C is also a great example of like if you search PyPI for PyObjC -framework, you will find a zillion frameworks that are like all the things that have been wrapped so that
did I search the right thing? Just PyObjC?
PyObjC. Yeah, you
okay.
drop the C. So yeah,
Autonomous driving.
no. If you add a C to the end of the search, you
Gotcha.
will. Yeah. So and if you
Yeah, there we
scroll
go.
down, there's like a ton
Pi,
of
OBJ Core, Mass Shortcut, CF Network. These are the accounts. These are the important subsystems of macOS, for example, right?
right, and there are dozens and dozens of them.
Oh yeah,
Right. Yeah. Like just scroll and scroll and scroll. We're only to the B's now.
I'm on. Go with the 14 pages. Let's go.
Yeah. So there's tons and tons of stuff, like this whole universe that's available to you in Python. And this is why this is like a kind of a, as much as we were talking about very generalized, like, oh, local compute is really powerful and everything. Like there's a general aspect to this, but there's a really Python specific aspect to this, which is there's all these libraries and tools that are not just that were not just developed as a proof of concept, but are like consistently maintained and used pretty heavily in some like niche areas that where people really are using them in production, but they're not really talking about them all that much because they don't think they're of interest to the broader community. They're not getting out there as much.
Like nobody's excited about Browser Engine Kit, which is just that thing built into macOS, and then I'm talking to it from Python. Oh, okay, good for you. Like it's not like I invented a new async web framework or anything, right?
Right. Or like here's my new system for integrating AI, LLMs with cloud image generation and the to defraud parking attendants or whatever the most recent hot startup is. They're all or super high scale numerical computing or GP, or I guess not even called GPU anymore. It's just like parallel compute. Not all these things make great individualized demos, but the infrastructure, there is a rich soil for you to plant all kinds of different applications in, and a lot of people, and actually this is something that I have not brought up in the talk, but that is something that I would love to kind of get out there as an idea, which is, I said, like, some of these tools, you use them, you get these weird error messages, and you kind of get stuck. And a lot of people get stuck and bounce off attempting to use desktop stuff or local compute stuff because it's not as popular, so there's not as many resources, so people can't easily figure out how to use them. But quite often it's worth doing that little extra bit of work to dig in and figure out what the problem is, because as frustrating and confusing as it can be to kind of trace through a traceback in somebody else's library that was like supposed to work and just isn't for some reason, doing that debugging and maybe contributing a little bit upstream to some open source thing that's a wrapper for the thing that you want to use is often not nearly as hard as like, oh, well, there's a really good Rust library for this. Let me just switch the whole project over to Rust. Or like, oh, this is really, it's a Unity thing that I'm trying to do. So I'll just port all of my code to C#, right? Like it's straightforward because there's tutorials for how to do that. And you don't have to kind of go off by yourself to do this investigation. But it ends up being a lot harder in many cases to just, to go into a completely new ecosystem, redo all of the work that you've had to do, understanding the problem domain, debugging, and getting some high quality code to do whatever your primary thing is, just to access some new like binding to some library that is available somewhere else.
Yeah. Those are definitely fraught with danger. I don't know if you've heard the big rewrite by Dylan Beatty, but I'll put it in the show notes. It's To the American Pie parody, which is like a 6-minute song, and he goes through all the generations of rewriting the code. It's incredible. I'll put that as a warning to folks.
I haven't heard it, but I've experienced it.
Yeah. Then this song will connect with you. One of the things when I'm looking at this PyPI listing here, it seems to me that as you're venturing out into these new areas that you're not super experienced with, like I know to do Python, but Objective-C, like didn't even macOS stop doing that? I thought they did Swift, right? Which still routes down to the same stuff, I'm pretty sure. But you could go to your favorite chat coding assistant and say, how would I accomplish this thing I want to accomplish in straight Swift? It could give you the answers using some of these APIs. And then you could say, now imagine there was a compatibility layer, rewrite it in Python. I bet you would be pretty darn close, right? As opposed to if you ask how to do it in Python, it might just go haywire, go, make up some crazy wrapper, right?
Yeah, this is a place. So I personally have had just a series, like I am I guess an AI skeptic.
Okay.
And so I tend to, one of the most popular articles on my blog is the grand unified theory of the AI hype cycle. And I have concerns about the energy use and the training data provenance and the copyright issues and all kinds of social stuff like that. But fundamentally, I am trying to educate myself about these technologies. I am trying to use them and like learn what they're good at. And I see some folks like Simon Willison having great success doing.
Yeah, he's leading the way for sure.
Stuff. And I try to do some of this stuff, and they just faceplant for me really hard all the time. I have never had an LLM successfully do something that I want to do, possibly because the stuff that the LLMs are good at, I can do in my sleep. And so I just I've already typed all the code the LLM would type for me faster than it could get it out. And then I hit a problem like, how do I do a business chat integration on macOS with, PyObjC framework business chat? And it has no idea because there's no example code. It really is, an example of a place where if an LLM is really good at doing a particular kind of thing with code, like if you're getting a lot of really solid, like quick, accurate, correct implementations, that probably means that there's just a ton of open source code that already does what you need.
Right.
And
and libraries and examples, yeah.
Right. You'd probably be better off just using a library that did that. And not to say that there's no cases where like it can integrate two things, but it can integrate two things that are already kind of speaking the same language, that are largely in the same area of the token vector space in the model, right? Like that there's overlap between the way that these things are expressed. And being off the beaten path with some of these libraries that are less frequently used and that do require you to like know the Objective-C API, know the C# API, know the translation rule, and then express the thing in terms of the translation rule. Like, yeah, it can be really like you're definitely much better off in terms of both if you're using LLMs, but also even if you're just looking for reference material, learn the translation rules because they're often quite simple, and then look for the example in the other language, even if you don't know the other language. Like, I don't really know Objective-C. I don't really I know C and I can kind of read it. There's not actually all that much to Objective-C. I definitely don't know C#. And I've gone from, and C# definitely has some syntax. Like there's @ signs and square brackets all over the place. And I'm like,
a lot of symbols.
I don't really know what this means, but it is nevertheless pretty straightforward to look up an example, because like most of the examples for like demos of doing the thing that you need to do with an API are going to be a flat sequence of method calls, right? Just like do this, then do this, then do this, then do this. And you're like, okay, well, I know it's dash greater question mark for some reason. I don't know why they're doing that, but that's the symbol in this language. And so like, but I know that when I see that, that means I have to use the, 2 pairs of parentheses in Python or whatever.
Right.
That is a made up example from a fake language, but there are lots of like very straightforward translation rules. And like, just as an example, right, there's PyObjective-C uses the Objective-C runtime, which like Swift has its own stuff that isn't necessarily always exposed to this, but like the core of the frameworks is all exposed via the Objective-C runtime to Swift in the same way that it's exposed to Python. If you look at a method name, there's a rule, you like replace all the colons with underscores, and then that's kind of the method name that you would use. Rubicon, which is a different Objective-C bridge that works on iOS, has a similar set of rules. They're not exactly the same, but like once you know what they are, you can just apply them over and over again. And if you can find an example of the C version, you can find the Python, or you can work out the Python version for yourself pretty straightforwardly.
Yeah. And I agree with you about the farther afield you go, the harder it gets. which is why I imagined like you try to get it to do it in the one language and you try to get it to help you convert that quick. You know what I mean? It's going to have a better chance than some
Right.
super niche thing, I imagine.
Although ironically, there well, and in the Objective C docs, you get the same kind of like click on this tab for Python, this tab for Objective C, as you get in Apple's official docs, where it's click on this tab for Objective C, this tab for Swift. It's a similar type of.
That's pretty handy. Yeah. Yeah.
But when you have a one of the things, so like at first it seems like, oh, must be such a pain in Python. You're constantly having to jump back and forth and do all this mental translation. And while that is true, there's also the fact that if you're like writing a Swift app, like I've done relatively little of this type of development, but like I have run through the kind of like Swift tutorials and whatnot, so I understand how to use Xcode. I've done a bunch of stuff with code signing and like reverse engineering how to do that. Sometimes involves watching what Xcode would do and then trying to figure out what happened. So I have done the kind of happy path version. And the thing is, you don't get a REPL with Objective-C or with Swift or C#, right? And the fact that you can, even though you do have to do this tedious translation sometimes for these types of APIs, it's almost the same thing as like if you're just doing regular web development and you're reading a JSON API and the SDK is in JavaScript, right? You don't typically think of that as being like a laborious, difficult translation step. You just look at the JavaScript, and if the JavaScript is not telling you what you need, you go and you just look at the HTTP underlying it, right? Like, and you know how to parse JSON and you know how to deal with HTTP resources. And it's the same kind of mental translation. This is a pretty straightforward thing that programmers do all the time without even thinking about it. And one of the things that makes Python a lovely language to do that, if you're working in a web context, is you python-m async IO, or you run Python as a REPL, and you just start fiddling around with some example data. You load it up and you start calling the APIs. And for a lot of these APIs, you can, the difficulty of the extra translation step, the absence of a specific tutorial, is easily eclipsed and then some from the fact that you can do all of this development kind of iteratively and interactively in not necessarily even just a REPL, but also like a Jupyter notebook. Like a lot of these things, open up a Jupyter notebook, start calling the APIs that you need to call, record the output, have a look at what the OS is telling you. There are exceptions to that.
Iterate.
In particular, in like, if you're doing like full-on desktop app development, sometimes you get into these weird places where like you really need like an app bundle on the Mac, or you need like some registry keys set on Windows that point at a particular executable. And so you do sometimes get into these places where like, okay, you kind of need to participate as if you're living in the native developer ecosystem. But even then you can write yourself a little, like write a Jupyter kernel that like you can connect to that just has that little stub executable on the side, or has the app bundle that you can connect to. And because there's lots of ways to programmatically create a REPL in Python, or even just, if you don't even want to get that fancy, just a text field that'll eval some Python to interactively discover whatever it is that you need to learn about the API. So you got a lot of powerful tools that, again, once you've kind of determined like, okay, I'm just going to use Python for this. I have this problem that I want to solve locally on my computer. You can bring you have to kind of bridge these gaps to do some things that would be a little bit easier if you were using the native tools. But what you get for paying that cost is you get to bring all of your Python tools along with you and do all of this cool stuff that you already know how to do.
Yeah, that's awesome. And on top of it, you're talking about the different ways to check it out. We've got really nice IDEs, right? Especially PyCharm and VS Code and the 100 variants of that thing. You have really nice debuggers to go through and understand stuff on top of it. And sometimes you do in other places, but sometimes you don't. And maybe they cost money, you don't have that thing, and so on.
Well, and that process of having to learn a whole new debugger and a whole new way of getting your code to run, not to mention learning a new programming language, like that's a big cost. And it may not feel like it because, again, it's straightforward. It doesn't involve a lot of hard thinking to do all those tutorials. But it does mean that, you don't get to bring your superpowers with you.
Yeah. Well, there's also a Node.js type of argument to make. And that is, if you can write your desktop app in Python, and it happens to be talking to services you own, you can keep it in the same language. Maybe not the same frameworks because you're talking NS object sort of deals, but still, it's closer to one unified programming language end to end.
Yeah, and you can do it as much as makes sense, right? Like you can have maybe it makes sense to use positron, right? Which is the Beware browser-based tool. It's like Electron, but it uses Python instead of the Chromium like Electron shell. And so what that means is that you can say, well, I'm going to write like a Django app, and I'm going to do everything kind of the plain vanilla backend way, but I want this one thing from a local desktop app. And so I'll write it mostly that way, and then I'll use positron, and now I've got all the power of Python in addition to all the power of the web stuff that I was using. And you can move that seamlessly from the backend to the local compute as you need it, right? Like it's really that agility, that portability of like, you're not going to tell me where I can run my code, right? Like that's the spirit that I would like to inculcate in anybody who hears this talk. It's like, you can run Python anywhere, nobody can tell you no.
I'm trying to think of the conference hat or t-shirt slogan for that one. We're going to put down our obey the GPO. I'm going to put that one on. Let's take just a couple moments and talk about maybe 3 quick libraries that we could use, and then I want to talk about LLMs actually just a little bit. But let's talk about Notify Pi, and then your 2 projects, Quick Mac Hotkey and Quick Mac App.
Yeah. So I'm not as familiar with Notify.py. I've played with it a tiny bit. I actually recently added, because macOS has some weird restrictions on the way notifications work, I actually just added a bunch of stuff to Quick Mac App relatively recently to do notifications there. But yeah, Notify Pi, if what you need is like a background notification, Notify Pi is a much better place to start.
I see. Yeah, so it looks like a pretty simple API. I haven't really done much with it either. The one that I've used, which I had on the screen for a minute, but we never got to it, is Rumps. Ridiculously uncomplicated macOS Python status bar apps that just live. I've got one running right up in the status bar of my app right now, and I love it.
Cool. So what does it do?
So this one, I find myself very often having to take things like over on Talk Python or for course recordings or whatever. Like I have to take this title, developer trends in 2025 or whatever it is, and then turn it into kind of the slug that you might have up here, like lowercase, no symbol. Something could be a file or a URL or something like that. So it does a bunch of operations around that. Like whatever's in the clipboard, it'll trim it, lowercase it, uppercase it, turn it to this slug type of thing, or even make it pastable into Excel if it comes out of HTML, stuff like that.
See, and that is exactly the kind of thing. Like you just rattled off like 9 different things that you need to do, and it's such a simple thing. I'm sure you did it probably 1,000 times.
Without so brutal to type it out, and I'm like, oh, are you serious again?
And yeah, but you put that little status bar app in there, and it just takes a whole element of pain out of your day.
Absolutely, it uses Rumps and it uses Piperclip, and that's it. And it's not that advanced what it does. I mean, some of them are literally one line: return string lower, or string upper, or string trim. But it's so good.
Well, and you get to express it in a language you already know, right? Like string lower, string upper, string trim, string, title case, whatever. Like there's so many things you could do in Python that are just one method that you just already know how to do. So it seems trivial, but the number of keystrokes and motions on your keyboard and mouse movements to replicate that incredibly simple thing is like a lot, especially if you're doing it all the time. So yeah. I guess Rumps would be a competitor to Quick Mac App probably.
It's really, really limited. I think yours is more capable. It's good if that's what you want, but you cannot ask much of it. I mean,
yeah. One of the things that I'm doing, this is kind of veering off into a different talk and like other stuff that I'm doing, but I have also been trying really hard to like do more of this stuff for real in a way to ship to other users. This talk is more and what I'm going to be talking about at PyCon is more about doing exactly the kind of thing that you just said, like solving problems for yourself, using your local compute resources for you. But I'm simultaneously trying to like productionize this stuff to provide examples of like, and you can take it further. And because there are examples out there, right? Like Dropbox was a Python app for 15 years,
Right.
Like, and so clearly, like, if you want to, you can make pretty successful Python desktop apps, but there's so few examples and they're so far between and they're so like specialized that our community, like nobody's talking about the Python-ness of Dropbox. That's not like a talking point.
You may have the only desktop talk at PyCon, for example.
Not true, but the one other that I'm sure is there is Russell, who's in the slot right against me. So that one time, I guess, is the desktop time. But there is so much code out there that, right, like I maintain hardly any of these libraries. I have my two things, which are wrappers around other things that already exist. Right? Like all my stuff is higher level. And I think you've probably used the phrase dark matter developers in the past.
Yes. Yeah. I haven't thought about that for a while, but yes, I love that phrase so much.
But one kind of dark matter developer are just the folks doing kind of workaday stuff in banks that don't go to and insurance companies and car
not blogging or tweeting or Xing or whatever about it, right?
They're just doing a job with some code and we never hear from them, and they're like most Python programmers. Case in point, right? Like most of them use Windows. But there's another version of that, which is like there's a huge part of the open source community that's maintaining all kinds of packages to do all kinds of esoteric things with Python that we also don't, that aren't like plugged into the core development ecosystem that we don't necessarily see at conferences. And those folks who are doing more specialized open source infrastructure deserve more celebration. And like desktop apps or desktop integrations are one part of that, but there's lots of other, like signal processing things and like other esoteric areas that not everybody needs. And so they just have less of an audience. But the fact that Python is the second best language for everything means that anytime you need to do two things at once, it's the best language. And it's all those second tier folks that are out there doing the specialized libraries. Like the generalized libraries, the Django's and Flasks and SQL alchemies of the world, like that stuff is super important, and the language would absolutely not be what it is without that. But we're all kind of aware of that stuff, and it's that second tier that really makes Python like turbocharged powerful.
Right. You come to it in your little weird space of the world, they already have libraries for that.
Right. And we've all got something like that, right? Like no matter what industry you work in, you're using some set of libraries for doing that stuff. Even if you're working in like mass market social media or whatever, you're still probably using some cluster management tools or something that like not everybody is using that are that type of more specialized open source that's like still super important.
Yeah. Let me riff on one more thing here real quick, see what you think about this. So I'll tell you about an app that I wrote last week. I think it was last week. It must have been the beginning of last week. It's been a little while. I want a program that when I'm working in a project in a Git repository, I can ask an LLM, do a better job than Michael's 4 words to summarize the commit I'm about to make to Git. Right? Like I want to say updated dependencies or more error checking, right? But not what I did, why I did it, right? I should do better, but I find in real life I don't. And so I said, well, okay, what can I do? Well, I'm going to use this thing called LM Studio, which is cool because it lets you download stuff from Hugging Face, like most of the models that you know about, the llamas and the mistrals and so on, right? But it also, the second tab that looks like a terminal, it runs a OpenAI compatible server on your local machine. I have like my Mac Mini that has the most RAM. I just leave it running there. And then anywhere on my local network, I can just use it to run code against. And so I wrote maybe 100 lines of code that'll go through a Git diff, take all those pieces, put a good prompt in front of it and send it over there and then get it back in a structured way that has like a title, but then a description below it if you go into detail, like GitHub supports and so on. And costs nothing. It doesn't really hurt the environment very much because it's just running for like 4 seconds on my local machine, and my iStats menu says it uses 7 watts for 4 seconds, which it's like a LED light bulb for 4 seconds. It's not nothing, but it's not melting the earth level of GPU usage. You know what I mean?
Right.
So, and it's also local, so it's not sharing your data, right? So I think that this, for people who are like, I want to build something local, but it kind of needs an LLM, I think this is a pretty neat thing. Whatever models you have installed, if you ask for them, it'll load them up and just answer your question with it. It's pretty neat.
Yeah, and like I do feel like there's still a pretty big like one of the things that has stopped me from doing more stuff like that is really and this is really frustrating attempting to like search around on Hugging Face, because I feel like there are no what Simon termed vegan models that I can find. The ones that are like all the data was collected consensually and like, so like,
yeah.
But if we could square that circle, and I think some people are working on that, again, like you said, 7 watts for a few seconds, right? Like that, that level of power utilization, not only is it less, but also like you can know if you're, for example, like I've got solar, and so like I know when it's basically free in terms of environmental impact. And I can run it at those times. There's also the fact that if we could get, square the training data problem, you get the privacy concerns, because it's not actually like a lot of the privacy concerns with LLMs are just, it's a server, nothing to do with LLMs, right? Like it's just, if
you're giving this data to another
right.
place, and
you are giving it to Sam Altman personally. He can do what he wants with it.
I think the other part that's bad about LLMs is they could turn around and be turned into training data, which then gets turned as results. Not just they have it, but it might become the way that the thing speaks to others, which is even worse.
And so, so you by doing local compute, you still have to worry about the training data. You still have to worry a little bit about the environmental usage, but you can keep your own eye on it. Like you can measure it and decide like whether it's a useful, like you're already doing, you're probably doing like transparency effects on your desktop that
just give people a sense. Right now I'm doing a live stream, so I'm doing screen sharing, and you and I are talking, and it's running at 17 watts on my Mac Mini. So it's I mean it's and that's 30% CPU, right? So it's it's pretty mellow. I think this solves two of the 3 problems, Glyph. I think it solves or avoids pretty much the environmental effect, at least from running the questions, not training the models in the first place, and it solves the privacy. It certainly doesn't address what I generally consider to be more or less copyright theft that these things constitute, but they already exist. And you're saying like I dislike that is not going to make it go away. It just means you're somewhat disadvantaged,
right?
Which is a tough place to be, I think, honestly.
Yeah, it is. Although one thing about the another thing that I find LLMs often teach us this interesting lesson, and this local models can actually make it clearer because they're worse, like because they're quantized down to be less powerful.
Yes.
You can see this a little bit more, which is like that generating the commit message thing. Like if that is being useful to you, then no shade or anything. I think that's definitely better than just typing, TK, TK, TK or whatever, which is probably what I'd do.
Letter A.
Right. But it does also kind of highlight like, well, the thing you really want to do in a commit message is you really want to say why, not what. Because the thing that the LLM can extract from the summary is always the less interesting thing. And so quite often when you're asking an LLM to do something, that's a good hint that like the interesting part is somewhere else. And so, it's useful to take a step back and on the commit message thing, just say like, why am I doing this?
Yes, absolutely. So, if I don't use the result when I ask the question, it might at least remind me what I did with great detail so I can write a better message. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it goes, because we were no longer checking for the user possibly not being logged in, which would have caused a crash. I'm like, dang, it figured that out. Brilliant. That's the commit message. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it's an interesting tool in the toolbox, and being local, I think it counts as part of this story. So I just thought I'd throw that out there because I've had a lot of success with that lately.
Yeah, and if we do figure out the training data thing, which again there are people working on that, we will still need the local compute part of the story to have like a fully like if we solve the training data thing and somebody does like a good fully consensual like everybody's on board with the training data model, and then it's just running remotely and it's still a cloud service and you're still sending all your training data to it, like well so having that the power to run these things locally and leverage the power of local compute, and as you said, right, like hook it in with an automation that you wrote again in Python, it having that agency and that power at your fingertips is super useful and a super important part of the puzzle, not just for like and a lot of the complaints about LLMs are really just the complaints about like automation and some of the problems with the computing industry and the internet more broadly, and bringing your compute local and taking full control over and responsibility for it can really address a lot of those problems. And I think it's something that we need to be thinking about all the time, right? It's in the same way that when you're talking about, a lot of the stuff we started off talking about with cloud compute, right? Like, do you need to have, all these esoteric services? Do you need to have so many resources deployed if you're not even getting particularly good latency compute?
Could it just be an Func Tools LRU cache decorator instead of a whole other service, right?
Exactly. And could you just do it locally? Could you do it radically more simply? What if it was just a Python module? Could you just make it a Python module? And there's so many places, not everywhere, but there are so many places where the answer to that is yes, it could. And in those cases where you can answer yes, you should totally do it.
Awesome. Well, very inspiring talk. I will give a two-part call to action at the end of this, maybe three. One, if you catch this on the YouTube live stream, go see Glyph's talk at PyCon. That'd be great. If you listen to this in the recorded version, edited and shipped to the podcast players, PyCon will be in the rearview mirror. So look for the recording of his talk coming down to PyCon. Or worst case scenario, check out the PyBay one. What do you want to add? People want to program their own computers. You've been very inspirational.
Well, of course, they should follow me, Glyph at mastodon.social, where I'm constantly talking about programming my own computer and all of the misery that comes along with it. And I also do some streaming.
You mean character building?
Yes, character and learning. We're learning and growing. That's what we're doing. I've got a couple libraries. You mentioned QuickMac Hotkey, QuickMac App. I've got a tool called Encrust, which is for code signing Mac applications.
That is not to be underestimated. That is a huge roadblock to going from programming my computer to programming other people's computer.
Yeah, and I am using it in real life. Speaking of, we were talking earlier about people who like other folks in niche areas who are doing things with Python that we may not hear about as much. One of my favorite things about Encrust is that Just Van Rossum uses it to ship some kind of app that has something to do, I'm pretty sure, with fonts. That's about as much as I know about it. But he is like actually shipping an app to users, and I'm using Encrust to ship a couple different apps. They're still kind of alpha quality, but they're sort of alpha quality that does like Encrust also nowadays not only does the Mac App Store, or no, sorry, not Mac App Store. Still have yet to do the App Store stuff. It does Mac notarization and it does code signing, but it also does Sparkle, which if you're not familiar.
This app has an update. Would you like to install it? Click enter to restart and install.
And it will generate and publish those. Like it integrates the tooling to set that up for you. And I did all the testing to make sure that you can ship an actual Python app and it installs properly and all that stuff. So, I've got a couple of users using that stuff.
Sounds very cool. Okay.
So I've been very Mac focused lately, just because that's the platform that I use. But there's stuff in the works for Linux for some of those apps as well. So I will hopefully have more to say and make it easier for folks to publish on their platform of choice. And as much as I would love to, point people at the one great project, once again, it kind of depends what you want to do. You got to find that weird niche in the Python world, weird niche in the world that you care about the most, and then find the folks making it happen in Python, because there's probably at least a few of them.
Yeah. Get together, upgrade some of these tools, get them totally working, and then encrust your apps and ship them out.
Please do. And let me know if there are bugs, because there almost certainly are.
Glyph, thanks for being here as always. Awesome to have you back. Thanks.
Thank you so much for having me.
Bye.